Hi, this is Spider-Man, and I'd love to stick around and listen to amazing spider talk, but Madam Web just told me Doc Ock is about to kidnap Mary Jane Watson, and well, a spider's gotta do what a spider's gotta do.
Two men who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to tangle. I'll be in 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon. They'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The amazing spider talk. The amazing spider talk. Come swing through the air, sit back and prepare for the amazing spider talk.
Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I'm the founder and editor of AmazingSpiderTalk.com, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals.
And I'm Mischievous Marcinacchio, the founder of the Chasing Amazing blog and author of 100 Things Spider-Man Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. And I, too, own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals. But Dan, we all know the annuals don't count.
Well, thanks for joining us, everybody, for a special episode of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk. We hope you enjoy this podcast and that it provides an intelligent conversation between two fans and collectors as we look at Spider-Man's universe in a bit of a bigger picture.
If you want to learn everything we know about Spidey, why not subscribe to our show, starting back with the first season?
And you can do that by subscribing to our show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or any other podcast player of choice. We seem to be just about everywhere. We'd love to have you along for our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future. Just head on over to AmazingSpiderTalk.com for all the details about where to subscribe.
Now, Dan, today we're going to be doing something a little different because we're going to be discussing our thoughts on Spider-Man Far From Home. But don't worry, if you haven't seen the movie yet, we'll be starting off with our general thoughts in a spoiler-free section before we move into some spoilers. We'll be sure to let you know when that happens. Plenty of bells and whistles and alarms. So you go see the film and listen to the second half of the show on the ride home from the theater, right?
And then after Mark and I have our discussion about Far From Home, which should be the most of the episode, I'm going to be joined by a special guest, Scott Carelli of the Spider-Man Minute podcast, another great Spider-Man podcast that both of us have appeared on in the past, to talk about all of our favorite obscure Easter eggs in the film. I brought Scott with me to the theater and tasked him in joining me on the Easter egg hunt. So that's going to be a lot of fun to talk about all the little things that we found in the film. And you can kind of compare whether you saw all of them or maybe there was one or two you missed and you got to go back and see it again.
Sounds like a plan, Dan. I eagerly await that because as I was saying to you off air here, I'm terrible at spotting Easter eggs when seeing a movie for the first time. I got to see it a couple times before I can kind of put that headset on.
Yeah.
So if you enjoy the show and want to help us continue while getting amazing bonus content and additional episodes that we never release publicly, go to our show notes and check out our Patreon page and consider joining our team. It's the way that we keep the lights on and keep this podcast going. Without the Patreon, this episode would likely have never happened.
Well, enough of that, Mark. The people at home can't wait to hear what we have to say about Spider-Man Far From Home.
What's new? Is Spider-Man still wearing red? Is it blue? Maybe he took a week off 'cause he had the flu. But probably not 'cause his methods seem tried and true. Let's find out in the Spider-Man review.
All right, Mark, I got to see Spider-Man Far From Home about a week ago, and I'm still really, I got to be honest, I'm still kind of processing how I feel about it. You know, it's kind of a complicated film, and I'm not going to get into the details of why I feel that way here just yet, but I wanted to ask you about, like, the circumstances via which you saw the movie.
Yeah, unlike you, I'm not some fancy Hollywood dweller. So, you know, seeing movies before they come out, it's a bit of an arduous task for me. But fortunately, I got a special invite to a screening via United Airlines, which, you know, they're all over this movie, right, Dan?
Yeah, right. The promotional stuff for this it's all throughout the film. You can't make that mistake. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, instead of trailers for movies, like before the movie started, we actually got like the in-flight video they've been using apparently on their flights using Spider-Man. So, I mean, total United, but thank you, United, for the invite. My wife and I got to go to a Friday night screening. And it was great. We had a great time. But yeah, Dan, I mean, like it's funny. I think we both really enjoyed Homecoming, the first of these Tom Holland movies. I think you probably enjoyed it a little more than I did, but I certainly am a fan. So I was kind of going into this movie anticipating it, but some reservations about what to go. And it's funny, like the things that I had reservations about in this movie didn't actually end up bothering me. But I did have some issues with it. So I don't know, do we want to talk about like some of the general issues? Because I think we have one very big issue that's simultaneous and it's not a spoiler that we could probably just talk a little bit about, right?
Well, I'll just give my general thoughts as well. Like you said, about walking into the theater, I was going in pretty like blank slate. I kind of wanted to see what it was because I think the most exciting thing about these movies is that they are kind of like the remix culture Spider-Man. So like walking into this, I felt like of any Spider-Man movie that I've seen or been walking into, this is the one I felt like I knew the least about going into it. Like Mysterio advertised as a good guy, and like Spider-Man in Europe. Like these are things that are not staples of the genre, specifically Spider-Man comics and Spider-Man movies. So I felt like I was just kind of waiting to see what the movie did. But you're right, I did have some reservations walking in. I think surrounding the typical things like, how would they pull off Mysterio? Or, is Tom Holland's Spider-Man still going to be Spider-Man? Which is a conversation that as it sparked a lot of kind of online internet fury over the past few years since Homecoming came out. There's people that really just don't treat this character as though it's an accurate representation of Spider-Man. And I can see where they're coming from, although I don't subscribe to that belief. But I did have that worry kind of going into it. And we'll discuss these topics later. I just kind of want to lay it out there, like where my headspace was at walking into the movie.
Yeah, and I mean, and not for nothing, when I was referring to reservations earlier, I think they were tied into that because I generally come out on the side of what you think is that I don't totally buy into this idea of that it's not Spider-Man, but there were elements about Homecoming that kind of had me kind of teetering in that direction to a degree. Not totally buying it, but like kind of being open to that argument from people depending on my mood of that day. Because I had the same. I've actually not seen the Venom movie yet, but like kind of my criticism of that has always been, it's a Venom movie that doesn't really seem to be based on anything. Adapted from anything that we know from any kind of real source material because it doesn't even have Spider-Man in it. So, it's like you're taking an established IP and just doing something totally different with it. I mean, at that point, why not just create a new character if you're going to do that? I don't think we're even close to that level here with this version of Spider-Man, and we could talk about that in more detail. But there were I had some doubts where it was like, well, if they go too far in one direction in the sequel here, maybe we'll be teetering into that territory. But I don't think they did.
All right, so I think we can address our first major complaint, and I don't want to start this off with a negative because I think, if from what I've talked to you, Mark, you enjoyed the film, right? And I did too. So I think just getting into our general thoughts on the film, Mark, we both really enjoyed it, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a good Spider-Man film. I think the way I would put it, a couple of people have asked me, well, what'd you think? How does it compare to other Spider-Man movies? And I would say, it's not my favorite Spider-Man film, but it's better than all of the bad Spider-Man films. And I think we can kind of say in terms of the bad I know I don't mean to be harsh about it, but when we're talking about the lesser Spider-Man movies, we're talking about Raimi's third film, and we're talking about both Mark Webb films, right? I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's fair. I still have a lot of respect for Raimi's third film in the craft element of it, which is something that I feel like neither of these MCU films have been able to match, like the pure level of craft that was on display in all three Raimi films, plot notwithstanding in the third movie. But yeah, I think it's elevated above those, and I would put it well above the Amazing films and well above Spider-Man 3, in that it tells a far more coherent story and one that you can really get caught up in. But yeah, it's not on the level of like a Spider-Man 2, a Homecoming, or an Into the Spider-Verse for me, but I don't feel like it's like that far flung from that territory. It's somewhere on the upper end in between.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. But since we were kind of going in the direction of starting with a negative, let's start with a negative. With all that said, no, I mean, like, to me, and I think I said this even about Homecoming when we podcasted about it, this feels like two movies to me. And a very good movie starting about an hour into it after a certain twist in the plot. And then, but the first movie had a lot of problematic areas, Dan. Like the plot didn't make sense.
You mean the first half
Correct.
of this movie?
Correct. Sorry, the first half of Far From Home really seemed to be kind of struggling to find what it was about. There just didn't seem to be any stakes to it. I feel like it treats its characters like they were dumb. I feel it treats its audience like it was dumb, and I'm not saying like, oh, like in a like a really like gnashing of teeth kind of way, but I feel like, in trying to keep up a certain appearance about who everyone was in this movie, like they really were like they just were. I feel like the script and the direction, it just didn't go all in. And even though I found the performances to be good throughout, I enjoy the cast, I enjoy the interpretations of these characters. The story was just lacking any punch or bite to it, and it really scuffled for like the first hour or so.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. The first, I'd say 45 minutes, an hour, I really was worried about the movie. And I think it's maybe a little over-reliant on what's coming next. And it's really hard to talk about this without spoiling anything or getting into the details of it. And I really don't want people to be spoiled for this because it's not what you're expecting. Even for hardcore Spider-Man fans like ourselves, I found myself at times really kind of caught off guard by where the story went. Even if I, walking into theaters was kind of predicting elements of it, it's the details that make it really fantastic. And there's a scene halfway through this movie where the whole movie changes and it just comes to life, out of nowhere.
Yeah, and like you, I'm having a hard time kind of being specific and trying to remain spoiler free. I mean, but like I said, it just felt like there was just a lot of contrivances in terms of like high school hormones and whatnot. I mean, like there was nothing. It's funny, like part of me was worried. One of my apprehensions going into this was like the mechanics of how they would get Peter to Europe and would it be forced or not, especially in light of Endgame. And what we learned what happened with Endgame, which was that, can I spoil Endgame, Dan? Are we game to do that now? Or, I mean, we already spoiled it in another podcast.
We're spoiling Endgame. So if you haven't seen Endgame, stop listening to this.
Yeah. So, I mean, with the mechanics being that we're 5 years into the future, and it just so happened that, like, Peter and all of his castmates were snapped out of existence by Thanos in Infinity War. I was kind of curious how that was all going to be addressed and integrated. And again, without spoiling it now for Far From Home, I would say that I was mostly satisfied with that transition. I got some laughs out of it in terms of how they addressed it. I mean, it's still like, when you really think hard about it, like just the entire premise of bringing a few billion people back into a world that was not, where they didn't exist for 5 years, the world would collapse upon itself and this would all be over. There would be no class trips to Europe. But hey, we're putting that aside and we're sending the kids to Europe. And I think like they played that kind of well. And I feel that they played Peter's role in wanting to just get away from it all and have a vacation. I thought that was handled pretty well in terms of how they did it here.
I totally agree with that, and I think they utilize Aunt May and her role in the world in an interesting way in regards to the 5-year time jump. And yeah, I don't think it's quite as deep as you would want, but I think if you're coming to these movies expecting them to handle it like, Jane Eyre or something, you're probably going in the wrong direction. Although sometimes these movies want to treat their subject matter quite seriously. So, whatever, they're having their cake and eating it too, but in the case of this movie, I think it really works. And it provides a kind of satisfying, update on what the world is like in some ways.
I mean, you talk about treating itself seriously. What I've liked about both of these Spider-Man movies so far is I feel like, okay, they're the funny movies. You could say the two Ant-Man movies are the funny movies too, but the Ant-Man humor is almost kind of like a hipster kind of humor, whereas I feel like these two Spider-Man movies are really kind of kitschy and goofy, and they're consistent, and it works because they're consistent about it. Like they play certain things for really goofy kind of dad jokes, and because they do it consistently throughout, I can't complain about it. And I feel like, in essence, that's how they handled the snap here, was by making a bunch of dad jokes about it. And that was fine because I was laughing at them. I don't know, maybe because I'm a dad.
Yeah, it definitely made me laugh. One thing that I do think is a little lacking in this movie, and I wouldn't say that Homecoming was a real visual stunner. Like, it's my favorite MCU movie, but I don't think its visuals are particularly, like, you know, as like honed to say something like a Guardians, which has like a very distinct visual style. You know, this movie, to me, there were moments where I felt like it could really been punchier, especially in the first half with its like visual gags. Like, they just weren't selling it to me, especially for like a movie that takes place all over Europe. I was waiting for some more really distinct visual ideas out of this, and maybe that's a lot to ask from the MCU at this point, where a lot of the action is shot with like second unit directors and things like that. But I've seen the MCU do that in, you know, Endgame and in Infinity War, really provide some thoughtful, interesting visuals. And I think both of these movies are still kind of lacking that. I mean, it's directed by comedy directors, and comedies aren't necessarily known for their, like, you know, cinematic visualization, but that's something I still miss a lot of. And I felt like if the visuals were more up to par, the first half of this wouldn't felt like such a drag.
It's funny you're saying all that, and I wasn't even thinking this going in, Dan, but it kind of reminds me, you know, in terms of a comic book analogy, when we were reviewing the Parker Industries stories from Dan Slott, where, you know, they were establishing Peter as kind of this, you know, world traveling business mogul, and, you know, he's in Hong Kong and he's in London, but, like, you know, outside of like the occasional, like, there's Big Ben, there's some Chinese writing on the side of a building. There was no like true local flavor or interesting sets in those comics. And I think you could say the same for this. I mean, they're in Europe, and there's a couple like, oh, there's the canals of Venice, and there's the Tower Bridge in London. But like, I don't know, for the most part, it kind of felt sterile in that regard in terms of the setting, right?
They're all used for set pieces. They're not used for like local flavor. There's like, I mean, I don't think this is much of a spoiler. There's a moment in the Netherlands that gets a good laugh, and I thought that was like a nice moment where we finally get to see, you know, like what this country is uniquely known for in terms of its like populace and the attitude there. But like, yeah, you know, you watch the trailer, they go to Venice, but all you see is the main bridge. You know, there's not really, you know, too much going on in regards to like how unique Venice is in any way. And that one probably has the most flavor of like all the places. Like London in this movie is purely like Tower Bridge, Big Ben, you know, Berlin. I couldn't even tell you like what happened in Berlin of significance.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, like, at least it's splashy in that regard. Like, the set pieces are fantastic. But I mean, literally fantastic. The movie has such a brisk pace, there's not a lot of time to really slow down for that kind of stuff.
So let's talk characters here, Dan, because that's, I think, probably going to be one of the hot button issues with this movie from fans who've seen it. So, I mean, obviously, as we said earlier on, even after Homecoming, there were some complaints about this interpretation of Spider-Man. You know, one of the big things, and I don't think this is a spoiler because this is certainly true for Homecoming, is this basically the overall lack of Uncle Ben. You know, for me, you know, I was kind of okay initially in Homecoming without having the floating head of Uncle Ben guilt. You know, we've gotten that. We've had it, you know. I don't know if I needed it again. But, you know, at some point, you do kind of want to get a sense of what's actually driving Peter and motivating Peter. Why does he want to be a hero? Why does he want to be an Avenger? Why does he want to do any of this? You know, like in terms of his journey over these two movies. So here, you know, like it's funny. Like I think we got even less of that than what we got in Homecoming in terms of the guilt and the motivation and the drive. But like this, there's still something there there's an essence there and maybe it's just Tom Holland's performance, or maybe there's this just enough in the script to get to leave it there. It feels like Spider-Man. It feels like Peter. These feel like Peter problems. This feels like a teenager struggling with being a hero, trying to do the right thing, constantly screwing up, dealing with the Parker luck, having bad luck with his friends, but still fighting for them. I don't know. It feels like Spider-Man to me, and I just can't. I can't be convinced otherwise. So I don't know how you feel on that.
It's like 90% there for me. I think all the stuff you're talking about is 100% there. Like the Parker luck is there. Maybe not on the level of, how it appears in like Spider-Man 2 where everything literally goes wrong for him and falls apart. But it's there. And really it is the kind of the same balance that we started to see in Homecoming, which is how do you find time to be a teenager when the world is expecting something else out of you? And that's elevated here because in the first film, the world didn't want him. The world wanted him to be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and in this movie, the world wants something even grander out of him, and he doesn't know whether he feels like he deserves that, which is almost the counter arc to Homecoming, which is like he learned the lesson in Homecoming that he should just be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and in this movie, they're telling him, no, you shouldn't.
Right.
And that was interesting to me, if a little confusing. And I don't want to get into the details of it, but I found Spider-Man's overall arc in this movie to be kind of all over the place. It just was not as clear as in Homecoming, which I think is crystal clear, although if you were to go on the internet and ask people, it seems a lot less clear to them. So I'm curious to see how people react to this. But in regards to the Uncle Ben thing, I think we can say it, right? Uncle Ben is not in this movie.
Yeah, his initials are on a suitcase. I think that's all you're going to get of him.
Yeah, and that's in the trailer. And to me, I agree with you. It still feels like Spider-Man, but the thing that's missing is a level of dramatic weight to the proceedings that I feel like the guilt element of the uncle would add to it. And it's not that it's like the not Spider-Man. It just, I don't think it can ever truly get to the level of depth that we got in the peak climactic moments of, say, like Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 1, or even Homecoming when he's buried under the rubble. I felt like his mission as the character Spider-Man was a lot more central, and his feelings of responsibility were a lot more central. Whereas in this movie, the Spider-Man stuff feels almost like incidental. Like, he just puts the costume on to become a superhero, and there's not that weight attributed to it. Am I crazy here? It just feels like Spider-Man is reserved for set pieces.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, I think in almost every Spider-Man movie, even the ones that I didn't really enjoy, there's like at least one moment or two where like Peter will put on the suit and it's kind of like this moment of like, all right, here we go. Like, it's Spider-Man time. You know what I mean? Like you said, there's a dramatic heft to it because like he is, that's always at the core of who Peter is. He's an unwilling hero, like he does this because he's responsible. He feels responsible to do it, not because he necessarily wants to do it. And that's always, I think, the struggle of pushing and pulling him. And I feel, a lot of these movies get that. Maybe not the web movies as much, but even still, there's like that element of like him having to make that choice. And yeah, there was no point in this movie where I was like, all right, here comes Spider-Man. Like he's about to do Spidey stuff, like it's like you say, it kind of flows from there to there. And that's not to say there aren't satisfying hero moments for him in this movie.
Oh no, there are some very satisfying ones.
Yeah. But like but like you said, they all seem to be lacking a layer of gravity and depth. That maybe could it be Uncle Ben, or could it just be just a general treatment of the character and missing that one little essence of who he is? I don't know.
I think it could be both. Like for me, in Homecoming, Spider-Man is the one driving the action. He's it's a perfect distillation of who a teenager, what all teenagers are, which is like trying to prove themselves as an adult, but also distrusting adults and, kind of working their own lives behind the scenes. And that's what Peter was doing in that movie, right? He's trying to, appeal to Tony Stark, who's ignoring him, but also kind of going out and taking on tasks that are beyond his ability. And he has to learn the lesson of, like, being happy with where he's at. But he's always driving the action, even the choice at the end where he denies his adulthood in the form of that costume, Like, it's a perfect teenage story. Whereas here, the story is not as Peter-driven, and by its very essence. And I feel like it robs him a little bit of his agency in the movie. Like, he literally makes a decision at one point, and other forces tell him, nope, you're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And, that was really interesting to me. Like, I think it's interesting narratively, but it did rob a little bit of the, like, cheering I had for the character.
Now, in terms of the rest of the cast, which, again, I have read on probably the same areas of the internet where you've read them, some problems with, like, Zendaya's MJ and, Ned Leeds / Genki and all of these characters. But, like, again, like, I don't know, there's something. I feel like this is very much since day one kind of been established as, like, the Breakfast Club John Hughes movie meets Spider-Man, and I feel like there's a consistency to it, and that these characters seem to work well with each other, and their dynamics all make sense, and they feel true to themselves. So it doesn't bother me. I don't know. I mean, like, I don't need MJ to be a model. She could just be a teenage girl who's a little weird and dark, and I feel like Zendaya does a great job in this movie, right?
And we could maybe get there. I mean, Zendaya is a gorgeous person. Like, who's to say she doesn't become a model down the road? But I don't even care about that because she's great in this movie. I like this character a lot. And for those who, like, look at this on a surface level, or, like, she doesn't look like MJ and she's too weird and yada yada. First of all, I find all of those things really endearing. Like, her weirdness is great. It's like kind of like a Daria kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot. But, like, we get enough depth, and I'm not going to go into it here, that suggests that she is more alike comic MJ than, we may have suspected before. There are a couple lines, I'd say along the lines of, like, the Uncle Ben line from Civil War, where we allude to Uncle Ben. She alludes to things from her past that are affecting the way that she acts now, that is very akin to the MJ that we know from the comics. And so, it's just a different take on the character, and a character that, like, is still named Michelle, right, that it gets called MJ. Like, so I don't even know how seriously we should take all of this. It's a new take on the characters, and frankly, look, we just got done quibbling over whether Spider-Man feels like Spider-Man. Like, look, these questions are good because it means we're engaging with it and asking, whether it works or not. And for me, this Zendaya MJ character works 100%.
I mean, it feels alive to me. If I feel like I'm watching teenagers interacting in a superhero soap opera. So, like, that's all I need. You know what I mean? Like, I believe these characters. I feel that they all work well together. I feel that there's a chemistry between them, not just a romantic chemistry, but just a general social chemistry between them all. I mean, Ned is used a little less in this movie, and that's fine by me. I mean, like, he was very funny in the first movie, so it's not necessarily a slam against him or anything. But, like, like, he's still there to provide the comic relief when we need it. I mean, like, I don't know. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, there was. Yeah, I mean, actually, if I had any complaints in terms of the supporting cast, is like, I feel, and the same can be said for the first movie, that Marissa Tomei as Aunt May is horribly underused in these movies.
I agree. She has a little more to do here, but by the very essence that she's not with them, she's not able to do much.
I mean, I just feel like I would love. I mean, I don't need Aunt May. If you're not going to have Aunt May be, this, 70-year-old frail old woman, who, needs rescuing all the time, I still feel like you can get some punch out of Aunt May being the matriarch and having a moment with Peter, and I feel like we haven't gotten those moments. And Marissa Tomei is a great actress, so you know that she would act the hell out of it if she can do it. So it's like, why, like we're coming off a movie where all of these people were snapped out of existence for 5 years. You're telling me that there's like no, and it plays into what we were saying earlier too about the emotional gravitas of these movies. It's like, you're telling me that there was nothing that we really could do that would like give these two characters a moment to really connect in a deeper way than what we got here, because it just felt very superficial to me.
Why not make her a chaperone on this overseas trip, and have her be engaged with the action? The end of the first movie, says she finds out that he's Spider-Man. Like, I don't really get a sense of how that reaction went down, and how she felt about him being gone for 5 years. Although I guess the implication is she was dusted as well. So, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't need an Aunt May, Parker's have gumption stuff, but it would be nice to get a bit more with her there. And on that regard, I think a lot of the adults in this movie are kind of a letdown. They're all kind of acting a bit broad, and I include Nick Fury in that. And when we get into spoilers, we'll talk more about my feelings about Nick Fury in this movie. But, like, I don't know. I mean, the movie's very clearly kid-centric, but I feel like they kind of, like, brought the adults down to that level a bit in this movie, except for one person who we're going to talk about in a second, who I think is fantastic.
Yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal, man. Like, how great was Jake Gyllenhaal in this movie?
It's great. I'll just say this without any spoilers. Mysterio is everything you ever wanted and more.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a fan of the character from the comics, you're going to be happy. And if you know nothing about who this character is, you're going to be happy with it. I mean, like, this is, I was with my wife. Now she knows I love Mysterio. I wore my Mysterio shirt to the movie because I had
to. All
right. You know the shirt, Dan. I think we.
Oh, it's a great shirt. I'm jealous of that shirt.
But she was like, so this guy's pretty cool, huh? After that, I'm like, yeah, right? Now you get to see it.
That'll be the only time people think Mysterio is cool.
Yeah. But Gyllenhaal, like, he really does bring it. I mean, even if there are elements of the script that I feel are lacking in certain sections of his scenes, like, he just, like, he's got this charisma and just, knows how to act for the camera and play things up to the right amount without overdoing anything. Like, you could say he's chewing up scenery, but I don't even know it's that. I just think he knows what to do at the right level in every scene in this movie.
He is chewing up scenery, but it seems real for that character. Like, it never feels like an actor just going overboard. It feels like, oh, this is this guy. I feel like you're right. When the script finally, like, kind of, like, lets Gyllenhaal act is when you get, like, this movie comes to life. Like, for me, this movie, like, you can track what's working in this movie by Jake Gyllenhaal's performance.
Excellent. All right. Anything else you want to broadly talk about before we get into some specific spoilers, Dan?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the visual effects here. One of my complaints about Spider-Man Homecoming is that there's a lot of kind of like a fully CGI Spider-Man in a suit that looks really crummy. Like on revisits, it's like, wow, how did that get past production and get into our eyes? And it goes back to the Raimi stuff. Like, the thing I like about the Raimi movies is it never feels like it's a cheat. Like, even when it is tricks of, like, old school tricks of filmmaking, but, like, it's minimal CGI and it's really kind of just, like, leaning into, like, old school movie making tricks. And I know that they make these movies differently, right? They shoot everybody in these kind of, like, CGI suits, and then they design the costumes later and add them onto their bodies. But, like, I'm willing to say it now, I think it's a real loss for these movies. And I know that the production is tight and stuff, but I would really like to see more physical Spider-Man stuff. And we know Tom Holland can do it. But there were many times in this movie where the overwhelming, much more polished CGI in this movie still feels phony to me, especially in a movie like this that is so reliant on what is and isn't real. Like, having non-physical stunts, I felt like there was an opportunity to do more with that and lean into actual production of real physical Spider-Man. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good assessment.
I can be more clear about this in spoilers, I think. But yeah. All right. Well, so on that note, go see the movie like immediately. There are more twists than you think. If you think you know the twist in this movie, you don't. Go see the movie.
Do we want to give a grade now, Dan? And then, we'll obviously talk about specific stuff in spoilers. Does that sound fair? Or
Yeah, that sounds good. So where are you at, Mark?
I'm giving this a B, which I think would probably put it around the first Raimi Spider-Man movie for me.
Yeah, and I will give it a B as well. It's like a 7 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, I think that's, maybe we should go 1 to 10 for movies.
It's all baloney. None of it means anything. You know what? I'm giving this one 3.5 film reels out of 5 film reels.
There you go, Dan. I love it. All right,
let's do some spoilers.
You're the Spider-Man from YouTube.
You'll excuse me, I've got to be going.
Why?
Something has come to my attention.
First, we'll see who's behind the mask. I can look into your eyes as you die. Peace. No. It can't be.
Does she know?
Know what?
So she does it. Good. Close to the vest. I admire that. I've got a few secrets of my own.
Spoilers.
All right, so if I could elaborate a little bit on what I was just saying, let's talk about Mysterio first, and then I want to talk about my feeling about the visuals in this movie. So,
Okay.
Mysterio is not a good guy. Spoilers over. He's a villain. Surprise.
Yeah, I mean, and it's I mean, I almost like pause to call that a spoiler because I feel like even from the initial announcement, and there's the mysterious man Mysterio who might serve as a father figure to Peter. I was like, I'm calling him BS on that. There's no way that this guy is not gonna like shiv Spider-Man in the back at some point. Like, this is clearly a setup, and I wonder if that kind of colored my perception of the first half of this movie, because like they really are just trying to play the first half as, no, he's this guy from another universe that's here to save the world from these elementals, and apparently only he and now Spider-Man are being called upon by Nick Fury, who is not acting anything like Nick Fury, to save the world from these like elemental monsters, these earth, wind, fire, and water monsters, of which we really only see water and earth, right? I mean, do we and fire? We do see fire, right?
No, we see all 4 of them, Mark. We've got like Cyclone at the bridge. We've got Molten Man in Venice. We've got Hydro Man in Venice as well. Or maybe Molten Man's in Berlin. And we get Sandman right when the story opens. Okay.
All right, you're right. But still, it feels, I don't know, I feel like we don't get to spend as much time with all of them as we do with some of them. But either way, the point is, like, this is all just a setup waiting for the Mysterio betrayal. And I feel like it kind of really grinds the first half of this movie to a halt. And like takes away all momentum and all stakes from it because you're just waiting for this turn, and because you don't believe any of it. Or is that just me?
Well, I didn't believe any of it either. And, you're expected that you need to believe in it, the movie needs to believe in it, and the characters in the movie need to believe in it. And everybody kind of seems like it's just kind of dumber than we're expecting, right? Like, you need to be able to expect that, like, what you're seeing could actually be the Spider-Man movie that you signed up to go into, right? Like, I need to believe that this movie is about Spider-Man defeating elementals that can tap into the core of the Earth and take over the planet. But in no way did I ever believe that. And maybe that's our jaded comics history, like, although that could be something straight out of a comic book. But, like, I never felt like any of the characters were acting like this was smart enough of a threat to spend a whole movie on, considering the movie opens and we're already kind of like done with half of them, like straight away. So like, a shoe is going to drop. And so all the scenes that you're seeing, you have no faith in.
Yeah, I mean, there's no rhythm to these scenes too, like you said, so that kind of throws things off. Like they are kind of dispatched rather quickly, and that was the other thing too. Like, I mean, like I know that these elementals were kind of modeled off of established villains, like water is Hydro Man, fire is Molten Man, etc. But like, I don't know. There's a part of me that like I feel like, you know, the CGI for these elementals. I mean, they're these big grotesque, grandiose things, and yet, like, I really don't feel that there's a threat to any of them. And I almost would have rather have been like, oh, you know, it would have been cooler if you had like Scorpion show up from the first movie and like, you know, there's a fight breaks out and Mysterio has to, you know, saves the day. You know what I mean? Like, it just didn't feel real to me. It just felt like this, like I'm like, this isn't a Spider-Man movie. Like, this is weird. Like, what is he doing here? Like, if this was truly the movie that we like you were saying that we had signed up for, Spider-Man has to beat the elementals, I would have been really disappointed in it because there was nothing about this that felt like true to Spider-Man. There was no like personal connection or you know, street level element to it. It was just like this really like over the top thing that just didn't fit into this universe at all.
And I think it's trying to do two different things. Like, I would have much rather have seen, we've seen that the projectors can create these, like, you know, alternate Mysterio, right? Mysterio and Quentin Beck are in two different places at the same time, right? So it can do people. And I would much rather have them been, like, the real characters they're modeled after, Molten Man and all this stuff, right? Because Spider-Man has no role in those battles, right? He can't do anything to stop these guys, really. You know, like, when he's fighting Molten Man, it's, you know, it's up to Mysterio to come in and save him, but he's just on, like, kind of scout duty. He doesn't really have a role in these fights. And if it was a human being that he could tangibly defeat, you know, then maybe he could have a role. Like, they try to give him roles, like, where he's in, like, a clock tower and it's falling over and he has to stop it or something, but it's not, it feels inherently like it's keeping him away from the battle to, you know, to shield us from the realization. But I think it's also trying to comment on the villains that we see in these movies in the MCU, where they're all kind of larger than life and the stakes feel completely meaningless until we, you know, but, and they're, you know, countering that in some way with Mysterio being like a real, you know, guy behind the CGI, right? Like, there's a whole section of this movie where Mysterio is wearing a CGI costume, right, that an actor would wear. You know, and to me, it's kind of like making fun of like the CGI in the movie and the kind of inflated spectacle of it all being really hollow and not satisfying, which is like great, except that like this gets back to my original problem with it is Spider-Man is also CGI and not believable. And I feel like if he was like a real dude and could cut through these CGI holograms, like that commentary would have landed a lot harder, and the kind of satirical edge this movie is trying to take would have actually had a real bite to it. But then at the same time, also, yes, like those big inflated monsters are just any other inflated monster we've seen and forgotten about in the history of the MCU.
Very true. So what'd you think of Mysterio's origin and background here and his connections to Tony Stark?
I thought it was brilliant. I thought the biggest laugh for me in the movie was finding out that like the guy who's providing the tech is the guy that got yelled at in Iron Man 1. I thought that was a brilliant stroke.
Yeah, I mean, like totally reaching back. So yeah, so these are, you know, Mysterio and his crew, they're all Stark Industry like cast outs. So you know, once again, similar to the Vulture and what was his gang called? The Scavengers or whatever.
Sure, I don't know if they had a name.
I think that's what they were. Well, whatever. They, you know, these are people. You know, the villains in Spider-Man's universe seem to be people that were hurt by Tony Stark's, and you know, again, now we're playing with the whole, you know, Tony Stark has too much influence on Spider-Man in the MCU, but like to me, that's fine because Tony Stark is the literal godfather of the MCU. Like, it kind of makes sense that everything kind of stems from this character. So, I mean, it's actually kind of more interesting than the comic book version of Tony Stark, if I'm being frank.
I saw someone on the internet guess that the barf system was going to be Mysterio. And like looking back on that, I wish I knew who that was, because that was a really smart guess.
But yeah, I agree. I thought that was a great turn. It made sense.
And that's the scene where the movie comes to life, I think.
Yeah.
Like, even the scene preceding it where Peter gives him the glasses, I was like, I'm not really digging this scene. Like, who are all these other people in this scene that they're just openly, like, demasking in front of? Like, there's a lot of, like, weird, like, bloated, inconsequential stuff, like, where they, like, it's chummier than it needs to be. And then when the reveal happens, it's like, okay, those weren't real people. I still don't know why Peter unmasked in front of them. But, like, that scene, all of it started to come to life for me. And I was like, okay, maybe this movie isn't dumb.
Yep. And then as Mysterio is walking through how this is all an illusion to Spider-Man, I mean, to me, this is like everything I ever wanted Mysterio, the villain, to be on a big screen, right? I mean, like, from the fast cuts and just like all of the misdirection, you know, from scene to scene to scene to scene, to him getting hit by a train at the end. I thought that whole sequence was like really unnerving and dizzying and brilliant in terms of this is what Mysterio can do as a film character.
And I love that Quentin Beck acknowledges the silliness of Mysterio, right? Like, it is all silly intentionally. Like, it is a guise to play off what the audience and what the people of the Marvel Cinematic Universe expect out of a hero, right? Like, it's almost his, like, mockery of what heroes are. And I thought that was really clever. You know, it's like to play the silliness of Mysterio into kind of like an intentional point about, like, also about, like, how costume design has changed in the Marvel Universe from its inception, where we started off with very kind of grounded Captain America in pads, you know, kind of stuff, and we've gotten into more fantastical stuff and finally really embraced the wackiness of comics in this, you know, the end of the Infinity Saga. Like, to me, the Mysterio character is, like, emblematic of all that. It's like, we can truly get silly now, and people will not even second guess it. Like, the audience isn't second guessing how weird he looks. He looks like he belongs. But Quentin Beck is playing that against us.
Like I said, this was everything I wanted. I mean, Gyllenhaal really brings this all to life. He so embraces this character and all of its angles. I mean, he really becomes, you know, a sadistic monster, if you will, towards the end. I mean, you know, he's ready to kill kids. He's, you know, and it's like, I buy it. Like, I mean, this is. I mean, I loved Michael Keaton's Vulture in the first movie. I think Gyllenhaal's Mysterio tops that in terms of MCU villains. Would you agree?
I think he might be the best MCU villain. Like, I wish he had a better, like, movie around him, but I think he's a really excellent villain.
Definitely. All right, what else do we want to spoil here, Dan? It's the world's our oyster.
Well, you know, we haven't talked about Ned and Betty, and, like, to me, that's, like, the first step into, like, okay, they're, like, moving him closer to who we know him to be. I mean, it's missing all of the drama of, like, it's Peter's ex-girl, but, like, I thought that was really funny and kind of emblematic of the Ned Leeds Betty Brant relationship. They're in a relationship out of nowhere, and it's tumultuous, and they're out of a relationship just as quickly. I don't know. I thought it was funny and very schmoopy, and it didn't overstay its welcome at all.
But again, like, it's this goofy, kitschy kid stuff that I was talking about earlier, about that I really kind of appreciate in these movies too. Like, I mean, like the very, very first scene in this film when they kind of bring us into what they refer to as the blip, which I like to refer to as the snappening, aka the snap. You know, they do this like very hokey morning announcement video to Whitney Houston's "I Will Love You" with all of this deceased characters from Endgame, and I mean I was rolling during it because it's just so over the top ludicrous, and I feel like Ned and Betty kind of play into that, and then the and I forget the name of the character, but the one character who is 5 years older than the rest of, you know, from when we first saw him. He was I guess he was 11-year-old when Homecoming happened, and now he's the I guess Peter's competitor for MJ's attentions, and I just like there was just so much about that was just so over the top.
Do you know where that Brad Davis character comes from?
Brad Davis, thank you. Okay, what do tell?
He comes from the issue with Jigsaw from Amazing Spider-Man where they go on the yacht and Jigsaw takes over the yacht.
Oh my.
He is the star quarterback from Empire State University and Mary Jane's date to kind of like make Peter jealous on the yacht.
Way to reach back, Dan. That is impressive. That's going in the Easter egg article, I bet.
It is. He never appears again, but the reason I recognized it was because that character also shows up in the Spider-Man PS4 game. It's the head quarterback of ESU. So for some reason, Sony keeps dipping back into the Brad Davis well. And I thought he was a fine addition to the plot here. I feel about him the same way I feel about Flash, which is kind of like their one note, and they don't really know quite what to do with them to integrate them a bit more. But they're fun for what they are.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely tried to give Flash some depth at the very, very end when they're all coming back, and he's like, oh, Mother isn't here? I mean, but, like, again, like, there was nothing about that moment that felt earned, so I just kind of, like, I mean, people in my audience actually laughed at it, and I was like, oh, I think they're trying to, like, give Flash some depth, but it's not really working here.
Yeah, I like that moment, if only because I'm a high school teacher at, like, an elite prep school or whatever in LA, and Flash is the perfect bully in these movies because that's the kind of bullies that are at the school that I'm at, which is like rich jerks that like use their money and kind of like social status to pick on other people. And it's not like the big burly Flash anymore.
Right.
And like that his mother's not in his life suggests that like, you know, he's this way because the money has allowed his family to ignore him in some way. And that's exactly the sad case with, like, I think a number of the students that I, you know, have experience with. And so, like, to me, that felt like a nice way to flesh out the character a little bit.
Totally. Want to talk about some Nick Fury stuff? Because, oh, man, talk about problematic, right?
I mean, I think he's got one good scene in the movie, which is, like, when he's in Peter's apartment, or, you know, or I guess, like, his hostel room, and he's threatening to take out his friends. You know, that's funny, although it doesn't seem as like stealthy as Nick Fury could possibly have played it, knowing the character. But he's kind of become a bit of a punchline. Like even in Captain Marvel, I felt like he was a little too like happy-go-lucky for the kind of grizzled spy, although he's younger there. But here he just kind of acts like a dum-dum the whole movie. Did you feel that way watching it?
Oh yeah, it did not feel it. Something felt off the whole time, and I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't as totally shocked when we found out why something was off as maybe some people might have been. I kind of felt something might have been going on there. I mean, we're already in the spoiler section, but do we want to like jump all the way to the second singer?
Let's go.
We find out at the very last post-credits singer that Nick Fury and Maria Hill are indeed Skrulls.
But not in like a bad way.
Not in a bad way. We're not in the Secret Invasion way, although it does still kind of make me wonder where Marvel is going with this, if we're going to have Skrulls and, you know, impersonating established figures like Nick Fury in these movies. You know what I mean?
I feel like they're not doing Secret Invasion, and this is their way of saying it. Because
okay.
it's like, how would you surprise people at this point with that?
True.
You know what I mean? It's like the cat's out of the bag. Like, and these are good guys. Like, the Skrulls just happen to be good guys in the Marvel Universe, apparently.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so it's Talos is Nick Fury, and, like, that's clever. And it made, like, I literally, with my friend, you know, Scott, who's going to be coming on the show soon, you know, he and I were sitting there, and I said to him after the movie, like, I thought Nick Fury was written really stupidly. And he's like, I didn't necessarily feel that way. And I was like, I know, it just didn't seem like Nick Fury to me. And then, like, minutes later, they revealed that to us. And, like, okay, fine. But I still felt like he was written stupidly throughout the movie. So, like, those emotions were real at the time. And to me, this is, like, the problem with all of this movie, which is, like, for the first half of the movie, it's like the whole movie is like Nick Fury. It's like, you're like, no, this is so dumb. This couldn't possibly be right. And when it's revealed to not be right, you're like, oh, okay. And you're on board, but like you still felt that way. It doesn't erase that feeling.
Yeah, and the character Talos even acknowledges like, oh yeah, maybe the real Fury wouldn't have fallen for it the way I did in terms of Mysterio. I mean, but like everything about the first part of this movie feels really inorganic and kind of forced, in large part because of how Fury is acting, and whether that was intentional because it wasn't actually Fury or not. Whatever, I still was watching this movie for an hour where everything felt forced, so it doesn't change that, right? You know what I mean? Like,
the answer isn't to make him a Skrull. The answer is to write a smarter, ruse that Mysterio is pulling on them.
Right, exactly. That you couldn't have said it better, Dan.
Let's talk about one of my favorite things in the movie, which is the MJ-Peter romance that I think is handled really well in this movie, in that they allow it to simmer for quite some time.
I mean, yeah, Peter, we established very early on he's pining for MJ early, and he wants to make a move on her on this trip. It's very similar in some respects to the Liz Allen stuff from Homecoming, except this feels a little more earned because, I mean, obviously, Peter and MJ had some moments in Homecoming, but also because, like you said, I feel like they let it kind of simmer and they toy with it in a really smart way a bit more. I mean, they play some misdirection with MJ and Brad. They have Ned getting together with Betty, which I think kind of puts the pressure on Peter to step up. And then Peter, every time he's ready to do something as Spider-Man, as Peter has to get pulled into Spider-Man business. And that's, to me, like when I was talking about earlier, these are the things that feel like a Spider-Man comic to me. You know what I mean? Like there's just something undeniable about Peter not being able to get out of his own way and do normal kid stuff because he's got to do Spider-Man stuff.
And I like how much she kind of rolls with the punches in that regard. Like, we all knew that she was kind of maybe onto him in the last movie, and here it's even, more heavy-handed, and to the point where she outright says, like, I know that you're Spider-Man. And I like how they played it for, like, she wasn't entirely certain. She was floating it, and Peter trips his way, kind of into it by not really denying it strongly enough.
Right.
Before the, the Mysterio reveal and stuff like that happens, which I thought was clever. I like nearly everything about this relationship. I buy it. I think they have a similar sense of humor, even if Peter is more awkward in regards to it, but you get the sense that like MJ latches onto this weirdness in herself as a sort of like cover up. There's a line where she like acknowledges like some like trauma from her past that I got the sense it was like the father stuff. She suggests she has an weird relationship with men, and that's really interesting to me. So the weirdness seems like a cover-up for like a character that can eventually blossom somewhere down the line, and that's really exciting to me. Did you read into that line the same way I did?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that totally felt like an all my past remembered kind of moment for MJ.
Exactly.
There.
Exactly.
And I felt it was smart, and again, it makes sense in the context of this character. It's not a reach. We're not tacking stuff on here. No, I agree wholeheartedly with you. I really enjoyed the dynamic between Zendaya and Tom Holland. I think they play off each other well. I don't know if they're quite Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield level in terms of chemistry. Even though they're both of my least favorite Spider-Man movies, they had undeniable chemistry.
Sure.
But like, I mean, they're certainly far better than Tobey and Kirsten Dunst were, and it just feels like this feels real to me. This feels like a real teen romance. I appreciate it. I thought the ending with him taking her web slinging was just wonderful, and I loved that it wasn't exhilarating for her. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like because it shouldn't be. Like that's got to be terrifying if you're getting taken web slinging, and like I feel like the comics have always played it as like this romantic grand thing, and it's like, no, this is kind of terrifying.
Never do this again. Yeah. The one thing that I think is lacking in regards to this, and you referenced Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, is like the kiss itself is really uniconic.
Yeah.
And I don't need like a big slobbery thing, but you can't even see the kiss on camera. Like it's like their faces cover each other up, and it's like, if you're going to build to this moment with them, at least give me something memorable. Like even the Liz one almost got interesting when he's upside down again in the elevator shaft, and it's kind of leaning into the thing from the original Spider-Man movie. Like I felt like in this, it was like, give me something to remember. Like I'm not going to remember this kiss. I don't even today. I can't really picture it. I feel like if this is going to be a grand romance, kick it off with a boom. You're in Europe for God's sakes. Put it like in a really. I mean, I guess it's on the bridge, but like do something interesting with that visually. I just don't think that the directors were up to the task of creating a memorable image here.
Well, they're trying to play. I feel like they're probably trying to play it off as two awkward kids having a kiss. But the problem is, like, I don't know how I feel as the 38-year-old adult watching two awkward kids kiss. You know what I mean? Like it's not really like, I mean, not that I'm like, a horn dog in a comic book movie, but like, like if I'm, if there's going to be a romantic moment, it needs to kind of resemble a heightened romantic moment or it's not going to work. And you're right. It doesn't really work in terms of the kiss because I think they're trying to play it too awkwardly. And as a result, it just kind of reads as like, okay, well, this looks like, two kids that, need to get their braces off and, maybe they can kiss in 3 years or something,
But even that would be a better choice than what we got. Like what you're describing is like an awkward first kiss, which is like great. We've not seen Peter like kiss anybody yet. You know what I mean? So like if that's the way it is, then you want to do an awkward first kiss, then make it an awkward first kiss. I think what we got was like nothing. It was like it was a non-take, Yeah. It just felt like the movie didn't feel comfortable with them kissing, and neither did the actors, And it's like, well, that's weird, like sell it or don't.
Right.
I'm not advocating for like me watching like two 16-year-olds kiss, although neither actor is that age. It's just like make a choice about how you want to play this moment. Let's get into like the climactic scene. Like I thought that the action was really like cool. I love the idea of the bots, which is pulled out of Dan Slott's like 618 to 620 Mysterio arc where he's the control master stuff, I thought that was really cool. I don't love watching a CGI generated Spider-Man bounce around on CGI generated robots, but I thought the stuff in the kind of like Tower Bridge's elevated section where Spider-Man has to rely on his Peter tingle was really great because that's exactly from Mysterio's first appearance, which is like, I can't believe my eyes, I have to rely on my spider sense. And that was thrilling, I think, also because Mysterio's images never let up in this movie. Because you always think, they always play it like, oh, it's over now. But it never is. And that's always thrilling.
Yeah, I mean, the misdirection is endless here, and it really works. I mean, again, I really felt the threat in terms of like, you had Peter's friends with Happy. I thought Jon Favreau was great as Happy here. I enjoyed his role in this movie because I felt like he was kind of there to continue on as the fatherly figure for Peter, but like at the end of the day, this is Peter solving problems with his powers, with his own powers, with his own smarts, using his own abilities to outsmart Mysterio. So to me, that worked.
It's a moving moment too inside the Quinjet or whatever, where Happy finally gives Peter the suite of Stark Tech, and Peter starts like experimenting on his own very naturally. And I thought, okay, they're really leaning into the Peter's genius, in this world. Like they're very much positioning Peter to be the combo of Captain America and Tony Stark. Like he is the kind of guy that would jump on a grenade like Captain America. He's selfless and looking to do good, but he's also got the brilliance of Tony without like the ego. So I thought that was moving to see this character seemingly kind of like accept his role in this universe in that moment. But back to like the tower scene, like I loved how that whole thing was created, and to have the reveal that the Mysterio on the ground wasn't actually him, but Spider-Man could sense it before the audience because of the spider sense, I thought was really clever. Although I wish we had a visual for spider sense that was interesting. Yeah. Like I don't need electricity shooting out of his head, but like I was watching the Nicholas Hammond Spider-Man, and he has this thing where his eyes like light up and the scene's colors get inverted, and it's like, oh, that's kind of fun. It would be nice to have it as like a visual cue for the audience, although this movie plays against that, which is also interesting because we don't get to see what he's feeling. So I'm on like a fence on either way for this one.
I think that's fair, but it's funny in that last scene when with the fight with Mysterio. At one point, he gets Peter gets the glasses back and he gives a command to get rid of all of the bots and the Stark Tech glasses. What's the acronym for the glasses? It's
Edith. Even in death, I'm the hero.
Yeah, there we go. So Edith confirms, "Shall I execute them all?" Meaning the bots. And Peter responds, "Yes, execute them all." And I was saying to myself, "Oh, those words are intentional, and that's gonna come back to bite him." Do we want to say how they came back to bite him, Dan?
Yeah, let's get to the post swing moment, because like as soon as the TV screen in like I guess that's like Madison Square Garden appears, I was like, oh no, they're gonna do it. This is it. This is the Daily Bugle. And then it wasn't, and then it was. And it was glorious.
Yeah, holy cow, folks! J.K. Simmons is back as J. Jonah. I leapt out of my chair. I was the highest I've leapt out of my chair in a Marvel movie since like everyone came out of the portals against Thanos at the end of Endgame.
So 3 months ago,
right? But still, but like similar for a schlub named J.K. Simmons, come on, man! Like, how awesome was that?
It was super awesome.
Did you feel that? Did you know anything about that?
I had no idea. I mean, I thought J.B. Smoove was going to be a Jameson before this movie, but I guess Marvel got the sense that they're like, we really like. There's no other choice. Like, it has to be this guy. The fans want it. He is an actor, like, says it's his favorite role he's ever had. So, like, why not? Now he's bald and he's back.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. And, like, even I saw something on Twitter where he was, like, at the premiere, J.K. Simmons. And even then, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, oh, look at that. They got him at the premiere. I guess, celebrating his role with these movies over the years. It was the biggest surprise I think I've ever had in a movie.
And what a way to enter revealing Spider-Man's identity. But that's the big thing. And Mark, I have no idea what to feel about this. I mean, I'm excited because, like, what does it mean that a 16-year-old kid has his identity outed? I'm also very terrified that they're going to sweep this under the rug and be like, either it didn't happen or everybody's okay with that. But, like, in my mind, it sets up two things. Spider Slayers and Kraven the Hunter.
Talking with my wife after the movie, my first thing was, well, I know they've wanted to bring Kraven into these movies in the worst kind of way. I can see them, like Kraven showing up being like, I shall take, because, in addition to outing his identity, I mean, they use those words, execute them all. Like Mysterio basically stages like this video in his, I know this is a dumb question. Is Mysterio dead or is he just apprehended?
I think he's dead.
Right.
I mean, he was shot, right?
Right.
It seems as though he died.
Yeah, so like in his death, he, pulls together one final trick against Spider-Man where he he splices together this video that he sends to the Daily Bugle that shows Spider-Man saying, execute them all, meaning the bots, but instead like it's framed as him saying like execute all the people of London, which kind of explains all the destruction. So Spider-Man, his identity is out, he's an enemy of the people, he's got the Daily Bugle railing against him, and the first thing that came to my mind is for the next movie I can absolutely see Kraven the Hunter comes in from Africa and he will capture the spider. You know what I mean? Right,
yeah.
And save the day. Like I could see that being the plot. So.
Or the city hires, like a Spencer Smythe to build robots.
Right.
And now we've got Jonah introduced and we're going down that rabbit hole. It could go any which direction that you want it to go. I don't know what that means for all the other people in his life. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. I thought it was interesting that when he's swinging, and this is an Easter egg we'll talk about, in the next segment with Scott, when he's swinging through the city, he swings by the Osborne penthouse from the first 3 Spider-Man movies. And whether that was just like there in New York, I can't believe that would be unintentional by Sony producing this movie. Like, does that signal that the Osborns are still a fresh memory? I don't really know. But I thought this was really, I mean, it goes to show, like, you can't really guess where these movies are going. in the future. I also thought it was really appropriate that Mysterio be the one involved in outing this, because like his first appearance, right, he dresses up as Spider-Man and tries to frame him for these crimes in Amazing Spider-Man 13. So like this is almost just like that mission played out to fruition in the movies.
Absolutely.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed our spoiler-filled discussion of this movie, Mark. I had a lot of fun talking about this. Not my favorite Spider-Man movie, but I had a great time.
Yeah, again, I mean, we've been talking over an hour about it, Dan. I think it was a fun movie. Like you said, not my favorite, but it's a lot of fun. I'll be curious to see what the rewatchability of this is. I know you say you want to see it again, but certainly, when it comes to, streaming and all that, I'll be curious how many times I end up rewatching this, because I don't know. I'm on the fence right now about that, but I did enjoy it, definitely.
Yeah, I've watched Homecoming a lot. Like, it's just kind of like a pleasure movie for me because it's got those like rises and falls. And this one is not one that I feel like I'm like, I really want to watch it for Spider-Man. I'll probably just turn on the Mysterio bits because, and we didn't talk about the hallucinations, but like I could watch those things in detail. I want to see giant Mysterio in his giant glove grabbing Spider-Man. Like, make that my desktop background.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it was just brilliantly staged and put together. So, kudos to that. Mysterio, my dream has come true, Dan.
Green smokes everywhere.
Yes, and giant Ferris wheels. Okay.
All right, thanks again, guys. And let's go to my conversation with Scott Carelli talking Easter eggs from this movie right now. Well, welcome back from the break. Mark and I just got done reviewing the movie in all the spoilerific detail, but as I said at the top of the show, I was going to be inviting on a special guest to talk about Easter eggs with me. Introduce yourself, special guest.
I'm Scott Carelli from Spider-Man Minute.
Yeah, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about what the Spider-Man Minute is?
Yeah, so Spider-Man Minute is what's called a Movies by Minute podcast, which is where you take a movie and you talk about it 1 minute at a time. So every episode of the podcast, we're talking about 1 minute of the movie, which if you have never heard of this type of podcast, you probably think it sounds completely insane. Most people do, and then you listen to it, and then you get hooked, and it's like one of the only types of podcasts that you listen to as a result. Because it is very, it's an addictive format, I find. But yeah, it just allows us to really get into the nitty gritty of filmmaking detail and things like Easter eggs, like we're here to talk about. But we specifically, my co-host and I, Zach Luna, discuss the Spider-Man films 1 minute at a time. And it's a daily show, Monday through Friday. And each episode runs between 20 minutes and sometimes as long as 45 minutes to an hour, depending on what we're talking about. And it's a lot of fun. And I'd love it if some of your listeners would come check us out.
Yeah, I'm sure some will. And many probably already know about your show. I've been a guest on the show. Well, I don't know how many times you would call it. I think it's 3 times, but like 10 episodes or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And by the way, you've divided it up. My presence is ever growing on your show, which I'm not sure is a boon or a deficit. But I love listening to the show. How many of these movies by minute podcasts do you listen to? Because I listen to 2.
I keep up with about I think 3 or 4, I think, that I'm listening to that I'm not making myself, obviously. About 3 or 4. Star Wars Minute is that's the home base. That's the mothership.
That's how I got hooked.
Yeah, for sure. So Star Wars Minute they're the mothership of this whole franchise, and then I've been doing it. I was the third podcast to do the Movies by Minute format after Goodfellas Minute. And then I did Back to the Future Minute, finished all of that, and now I'm doing Spider-Man Minute.
And, you started off doing Spider-Man Minute, and then they just kept making Spider-Man movies.
Right,
Back to the Future, thankfully, is over. So you're stuck in this forever.
Right, yeah, hopefully. That's the plan.
That's the plan. All right, great. So, I clearly I've been on the show and been impressed with what you guys were doing, and I recently appeared on the start of your third season, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But, I thought to myself, I've got this early press screening. I got an extra ticket. Who is going to be the person that's going to best complement my ability to spot Easter eggs in this movie? And I thought it's got to be Scott. He's going to know his stuff. And, I thought you'd know your movie stuff, but it turns out you are equally adept at the comic book stuff as I am in regards to Spider-Man. So you are an impressive person to bring along for us. As listeners know, I write these pieces for the Hollywood Reporter about all the Easter eggs and stuff. So, there's only so many eyes I have the first time. So, Scott, you were a big help. So I wanted to thank you in that regard. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of pick the top 5 Easter eggs that we found that we thought were a lot of fun to talk about on the show.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a great idea, and thanks again, Dan, for the opportunity.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So let's just we're going to alternate here. So Scott, you've chosen 5, and I've chosen 5. It's not all the Easter eggs. You'll have to read the article to read about all the Easter eggs we found in the film. But we're going to cover 5, or maybe a little bit more than 5 each. And anyway, so Scott, why don't you kick your list off with your favorite Easter egg in the film?
The first one that I want to bring up is kind of the very first one that I noticed in the movie, and it's not specifically Spider-Man related or really at all. It's more of an homage to another franchise. But the opening of Far From Home, even before the Marvel Studios logo, we get the Columbia torch logo, and it transitions directly into a statue in what country are they in? Are they in Mexico or Spain?
They're in Mexico, yeah.
They are in Mexico. Yeah, and the statue is it's sort of like this direct transition from the Columbia logo into the statue, which is obviously an homage to the opening transitions from the Paramount logo into the mountains in all of the Indiana Jones movies.
And why do you think they did this? I mean, I guess my guess is are they setting this up to be more of an action adventure than previously, you think?
I think it's because it's globetrotting. That's my guess. Much like Indiana Jones, we don't have those great transition periods of the dotted plane going over a map in this movie.
I think it would probably benefit with having some of that.
Yeah, absolutely, because it does seem like Europe is extremely small.
Yeah, they are just bouncing around in this movie. Yeah. A nice little map transition would have been nice.
Yeah. So I imagine it's an homage to the overall feel that they were probably going for with this one.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. Well, my first one is also travel related. Peter goes to, get his passport checked before he travels abroad, and he hands his passport over, and you see Peter's passport, but his birthday is in there, and I know that Peter's actual birthday is October 14th. And the reason I know that is because it's a holiday in New York City called Spider-Man Day, which was created by Michael Bloomberg. And they celebrate it. I don't know how many people are celebrating it now, but when they announced it, they celebrated it. And, the Empire State Building went red and blue for Spider-Man, and it was this, whole thing, right? But I noticed on this passport, it actually says it's August 10th, not October 14th. But do you know what August 10th is?
I sure do.
What is August 10th?
That is the date of the release of Amazing Fantasy 15.
It is, in fact. So they changed his birthday to create an Easter egg, and I'm kind of okay with it. And a pretty obscure Easter egg at that, but a fun one. So when you're looking there, try to see if you can catch a quick glimpse of his ID and what the date on there is. It is interesting, though, because on his passport, as per usual, you would have your birth date by year, but they don't have the year in there. So I was wondering, because of the blip, have they decided to remove years from things? It doesn't matter with age anymore because it's not actually a signifier of how, technically, long you've existed.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I imagine because they have that joke with Flash, right? And the flight attendant doesn't know that he's not 21.
Yeah.
So I imagine it's to prevent things like that from happening.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, cool. What's next on your list?
Well, the next one on my list is, definitely there's a few of these in both of our lists that are very close to home for me currently, as I am neck deep in the Raimi trilogy over on Spider-Man Minute. And this one is especially in a great Easter egg, I think, where, obviously there are posters in the scene after Spider-Man and Aunt May have a speech for her homeless shelter feast, sort of, not feast, but kind of feast organization that she has. And when they're backstage, there are posters for wrestling matches. And obviously, Crusher Hogan is the main event that they use, the wrestler that Peter went up against back in his wrestling days in Amazing Fantasy 15. However, the addition of that's a great enough Easter egg, but then the addition of having one of the people that he's fighting on the poster is Bonesaw McGraw, the wrestler that Peter fights in the first Sam Raimi movie. I love that. I love that sort of thing. Like that's really great. And now I really just want to see the match between Crusher and Bonesaw, because I don't know. I just know the Bonesaw's ready. I don't know. I don't know if he would defeat Crusher or not. But I would love to see that match.
So long as he had the person in the audience with the cardboard saw, that's all that matters to me.
Yeah, that's the most important part.
All right, next on my list is the Iron Man graffiti, and you can see this in the trailer. Peter kind of climbs up on top of Feast at one point, and he's kind of been tasked with kind of standing up for Iron Man's legacy, and he looks and he sees this graffitied image of Iron Man. And there's two graffitied images of Iron Man. I'm talking about the big one, not just the head one, the one with the full body. Although, if you look closely at just the head one, there's an interesting thing where if you there's a black light image that reveals Tony's face in it, if you look really carefully.
Oh, interesting.
But the big one on the wall that's really spectacular, I saw that and I thought, that image looks really familiar. Why does it look so familiar? So I scanned through covers of Iron Man comics and I found that Volume 3 of The Invincible Iron Man with artist Sean Chen uses the exact same posing as that character on the side of the wall there, but it's not the same artwork, which is funny because then in Volume 4 of The Invincible Iron Man with artwork by Adi Granov, which is the Extremis storyline, in issue 4 of that series, that same posing is on the cover just with Adi's artwork. So it seemed to be this common pose that Iron Man would often be in. Whether it was considered iconic and people were doing it intentionally, it seems very intentional. But then that exact image, or that pose rather, was then updated into a lifelike rendering for promotional art for Avengers Age of Ultron, which is kind of where it got its realistic spin. And then Insomniac took that promotional art and slapped it on the cover of their PlayStation 4 VR game that's coming out, the Iron Man game, which is must have been why it registered in my brain. So you can watch this slow evolution from comic cover to movie promo art to video game, and the video game image is the one that they've slapped on the wall here and given a graffiti texture and style, but it's literally that image. So I just kind of had fun tracing the evolution of these images. And there was a cover of Invincible Iron Man that John Romita Sr. did, where it looks really similar to this pose, but his hand isn't extended. So I was trying to think do we think it traces all the way back to Romita Sr.? But I couldn't make quite as strong as a case about that, so I left it be. But, this is how comics slowly update themselves to appear. One image translates to another image, and that's where we get this beautiful piece of graffiti today.
Wow, that was a real rabbit hole. That was really interesting.
I know. I'm already gone cross-eyed just talking about it.
Well, my third one is a shout out to a relationship that I honestly didn't really think we would ever see in a movie or anything, because it's such a it's a kind of a major relationship in the in the grand scheme of Amazing Spider-Man, but it's has very little to do with Peter. So it was interesting that they gave the shout out to Ned and Betty. And I just love that, we've been, I think collectively Spider-Man fans have been a little baffled, a little scratching our heads a little about whether or not Ned in this is Ned Leeds, or if he's really just sort of Genki, or what the deal is, like, because he's kind of both, but also neither. And so I really appreciated Ned and Betty Brant having their fling here, so that at least we can say that they did it. And just like in the comics, it's a little off and on. So
yeah. Off and on is putting it mildly.
Yeah. So I was very pleased to see that happen, and it was a really nice way to give these two characters something to do in this movie. Because Betty was basically kind of very basic comedic relief in the first movie.
She's like a featured extra often.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. So it was really nice giving her a storyline and then giving Ned something to do, because I bet the actor who plays Ned probably had no idea that he would get to have like a romance in a movie before. Like he's just not that type of actor. So it was probably a really cool thing for him to get to play, and I was really happy to see it. It was a really nice Easter egg for us longtime fans.
And now he's probably back to just watching porn.
Yeah, he's the man in the chair. What he does in that chair is no one's business. But
yeah. Well, we have some highlights of it. So my next one, it takes place in Venice, when the group goes to Venice, and there's a minute where the teachers and chaperones and student peers of Peter Parker are running through the streets away from Hydro Man, and they round a corner, and up on the wall are the street names in Venice, which is where all the street names are, because they don't really have like street corners necessarily in Venice. Have you ever been to Venice?
No, I have not.
Oh yeah, it's great, because it's just this endless maze of streets, and there's just no way to not get lost, and that's kind of half the fun. But those streets are called, I don't know if it's calle. I know that's like Spanish, but like it's not really Italian. But they call their streets calles, and it's like refers to the thin, narrow streets that like jut through Venice. But their calles all have, in this one wall, it's 4 Spider-Man writers' names with the letter O tacked on the end. So it's like vaguely Italian, I guess. And the 4
as an Italian, I am highly offended.
Yeah. I'm sure. So, I mean, it is lazy as all get out, but I mean, the joke is there. So if you're fast enough to catch it, it's Sterno, Slotto, Bendiso, and Michelinio. So that would be Roger Stern, Dan Slott, Brian Michael Bendis, and David Michelini, whose names all appear on the wall. I'm not exactly sure why they chose the ones that they chose. Like, I get Slott, I get Bendis. I don't think necessarily that there's a Stern storyline that really ties into this movie at all. Or Michelini, like, he's mostly known for Venom and Carnage, who most definitely don't show up here. So, I don't know. I probably have to think a little bit harder about how they might tie into this movie. Like, I don't think Stern or Michelini ever wrote, like, a Hydro Man comic, So, I don't know why they were there, but they were there, and I laughed about it as I was feverishly writing down the names. And, see if you can catch it.
Yeah, so then my next one, I would say, is kind of a big one. I mean, it's a major set piece in the movie. So it's Easter egg, I guess, is I don't know if it's quite really an Easter egg.
Let's call it a reference.
Yeah, it's more of a reference. But it's just Mysterio's hallucinations, and that those two sequences in the film are just, especially the first one, are just mind blowing. It's the kind of thing that I've waited my entire life to see. I mean, Mysterio is a top 3 Spider-Man villain for me, and so getting to see his hallucinations in live action. Live action, I guess, put loosely because it's CGI, but it's beautiful. It's so well done, and it looks exactly like it's always looked in the comics. And they recreate a couple of it seems like a couple of Spider-Man covers, and it just feels like everything that I could possibly want out of a Mysterio action sequence in a Spider-Man movie. It just blew me away.
Well, you're definitely getting Amazing Spider-Man 67, the giant Mysterio, right? There's a great sequence where the giant hand just grabs Spider-Man. I've been waiting my whole life to see that. And I think that's just the very concept of a Mysterio that controls robots indirectly. He'd always been a lot more involved in his kind of capers, but in Amazing Spider-Man 618 to 620, he controls a robot Silvermane and all these things from a centralized control point where you can see all the action, and that's exactly how this Mysterio is portrayed in these moments. So I have to think that was what inspired this Mysterio.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. But I also got a big feeling of I don't know if you played any of the Arkham games, the Batman Arkham Asylum games. Sure. But every Scarecrow level, it sort of reminded me of that a little bit. The way that it was structured, and because it's one thing to I don't know, read a comic and imagine what it would feel like, but it's different to have 3 dimensions and seeing every frame of it, of the actions taking place, and you're not using your brain to sort of fill in the spaces between the panels. And it did remind me a lot of the Scarecrow levels in Arkham Asylum, which was, I remember playing those levels and just being like, I mean, this is cool, but Scarecrow's not Mysterio, and this is basically Mysterio, right? I mean, that's what's happening here. And then, here it is now in this movie, and it plays out exactly like I always imagined it.
I would love to see Mysterio in a sequel to the Spider-Man PS4 game. We kind of got a little bit of that with the Scorpion, where his poison sequences, but not quite to the level that I would want them to go to.
Absolutely.
So next on my list is the Osborne Penthouse.
Yes.
Which, in the final moments of the movie, Spider-Man and MJ are swinging around town, and I don't know for sure that they planned this because maybe they were just swinging around that part of the city because they needed to get to, Spider-Man over to Madison Square Garden, which is it's not nearby, but it's not far away from where that actual penthouse is in real life. But these are the Osborne Penthouses from Spider-Man 1 through 3, the Raimi films, which you're covering. It jumps out immediately when you see it on screen. That's the Osborne Penthouse. And you got to think, Sony producing, these movies, they wanted to throw in, a little nod to their history in some way. Mm-hmm. But it's a pretty, loaded nod, especially considering what would come next, in that sequence. Do you suspect this was a tease at the Osborns returning into the series in some way?
I mean, it feels like they've been teasing that for a while, right? I mean, that's what everybody thought was happening with Stark moving out of Stark Tower in Homecoming. So I maybe they're doing a slow build up to it. I personally don't want to see them in the series until Peter hits college. I think that's about when I want to see them start repeating characters and villains and things like that.
Sure.
Let's go one more high school one with brand new stuff that we haven't seen on screen before. But they could be working their way up to it.
Yeah, sounds good to me. All right. Well, yeah, that one's an exciting one, and I think anybody who knows that building will notice it. It actually exists in between 40th and 43rd Street in Manhattan, in between 1st and 2nd Avenue on the East River. So if you ever want to go and check it out, that's where it is. Go take a look at where the Osborns and their humble abode is.
So my absolute favorite Easter egg in this movie is the thing that, when it happened, my mouth dropped open. I almost stood out of my chair. Like, I was so happy. And this was, of course, the moment where we learned that Quentin Beck has sent video of a confession, of a big reveal, to thedailybugle.com, and who else is running it but J. Jonah Jameson, played by none other than the man who's played him 3 times previously, J.K. Simmons. And this was such an insane thing for them to do. It's the thing that people have always been saying that's what they should do, that they should just bring him back because no one else is going to be able to play this role as well as he did. So what's the point? But I never thought they would actually go through with it. I thought for sure they would recast him somehow. And apparently whoever the powers that be, I don't know if it was Feige or if it was John Watts or who it was, but somebody made sure that they didn't cast anyone but the man himself, J.K. Simmons, and I couldn't be happier.
Just you wait. Willem Dafoe is going to come back to this series.
Well, he'd be better than Chris Cooper.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, no, this was incredible. And, I love that it's positioned like he's a part of the Fact Channel. Like it's like this, he's become this like uber right-wing nut job, like conspiracy theorist on TV that's kind of like disregarded. But yet he has this, he's like the Drudge Report or whatever, but he has this video that's going to actually like solidify what he has to say. And I'm very excited about that. We talked in our review that like, I suspect that maybe we're getting like Spider Slayers out of this or Kraven the Hunter. I mean, you posed that to me even in the theater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously, to me, it's very obvious that that's where this is leading to, because Kraven's the last big gun that they've got, the last bullet in the chamber that they haven't fired. And so I can't imagine that that's not going to be the villain of the next film.
And I think they set up Chameleon in this film, if I'm not incorrect, with the Dimitri character. I mean, Why else bring in a character that looks like Kraven and is named Dimitri if you're not going to go with his half-brother Chameleon?
Yes, I completely agree. I think you're spot on with that.
Yeah. Okay, great. So my final one is actually like a group of them, and it's what I'm calling the license plate Easter eggs. It's like the laziest Easter eggs in this movie. And there's a lot of them like that. And I got to feel like there was someone whose job it was just to come up with weird numbers for things to put on the back of license plates. Because it kind of feels exactly that random, right?
Yes, definitely.
So we've got like one, like for example, and part of the like fun of it is like while you're watching the movie, seeing if you can like live decipher their like numbering pattern,
This drove me insane. As someone who can watch a minute of my movie over and over and over as many times as I want to get the details I want out of it, this was maddening.
It's nice because sometimes they'll cut away from it and you'll be like, God damn. And then like a minute they'll cut back and you're like, oh, yeah. I got it this time.
Yeah. Oh, the editor was smiling on me today.
Yeah, right. Someone knows that I, Dan Gavassan, have to compile these. So, so like, for example, during the opening of the movie with the Sandman, if that's what you want to call him, on one of the license plates, like barely visible, are the numbers 463. Now, any other person would look at that and go, oh, that's just a normal license plate. But what it means is it's a reference to Amazing Spider-Man number 4, the first appearance of the Sandman, which was published in 1963.
Yes.
Like, that's how dumb we're getting here, right? So, like, when they're traveling through Venice before Hydro Man shows up, we get ASM 212, which is the first appearance of Hydro Man in, Amazing Spider-Man 212. But then some of them are more, like, obscure than even that. Like, one of them, when they're in, I don't even know if they're in Berlin when this happens, but there's one that says ASM 289, which is like the reveal of the Hobgoblin issue that like it's Ned Leeds where he's like already dead and we find out what happened like after the Spider-Man vs. Wolverine storyline. So it's like it has nothing to do with what's going on in this movie except that like the flashbacks with Ned take place in Berlin. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another one on the back of a Shield vehicle that says MTU 83797, and that means Marvel Team Up number 83 from 1979 in July, which is when it was released. Which, okay, great. And what is Marvel Team Up 83? It's an issue where Spider-Man teams up with Nick Fury.
That makes sense.
So you're seeing, that one makes some sense. Yeah. That one makes some sense. And then
it's definitely a less tenuous connection than 289.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well then we had 2865 SEP, which is for Amazing Spider-Man number 28, which was published in 1965 in September. And that's the first appearance of the Molten Man. And then we had TASM 143, which is the famous one where Spider-Man goes to Paris and fights the Cyclone, and the first issue where he kisses Mary Jane, which I thought was like nice. It's like a double one for this movie. And then lastly, on the back of Aunt May's car, when she picks up Peter at the end, is AMF 1562, which I don't think I need to say what that is, but it's Amazing Fantasy 15 from 1962. So they're lousy all over the place. And I don't think they're typically that hard to spot so long as you can decipher that they're actually something.
Yeah. Who do you think was the first person in the crew to put together that ASM 143 had both the Mary Jane kiss and the Cyclone, both of which they are going to directly reference at the end in the third act, like at the same time in the movie? Like, I feel like that. Did they do that on purpose, or was that an entirely like crazy random happenstance that it just happened to be those two things? Like, that's because it's such a tiny thing. Like it's not like the Cyclone is like a super well-known villain, for Spider-Man.
No, not at all. That issue is like really only known for the kiss, and even then, like, the kiss is like often it's like a secondary image to MJ's first appearance.
Right.
Yeah, that is a very, like, that issue doesn't even sell for a ton.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that is a very random thing to build your third act structure around if that's all you're trying to do is make that reference.
Yeah, so it had to have been just a crazy random happenstance, but like the first person who was like, hey, there was an issue with the Cyclone and Peter and Mary Jane's first kiss. And like, I feel like that would have blown my hair back if I was on that set when somebody made that connection the first time.
That's really funny. Yeah, I didn't think about it that way, but yeah. Now I can't help but think like, when did that find its way into the, because I mean, I guess the elementals are so random. You could kind of do them in any order, but not really.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is pretty wild.
Yeah.
And like, they're pretty essential to the plot line. I guess they could maybe have found another like nature-based villain to do there, like Plant Man or something like that. Is there a Poison Ivy of the Marvel Universe? I'm trying to think.
There's a Swamp Thing, but I don't know about.
True, yeah.
There's Man Thing, but I don't know about a Poison Ivy.
That's a missed opportunity. Well, Anyway, those are our Easter eggs and references. Scott, thank you so much for coming on to talk to me about these.
Anytime. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is fun. So, Scott, you mentioned a little bit about Spider-Man Minute at the beginning, but tell us what you're doing right now on Spider-Man Minute.
Well, right now we've just started our third season. So in 2017, we covered the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man film. Last year, we covered Spider-Man 2, and now we're starting season 3 with Spider-Man 3. And so far, it has been educational and very, very fun because it's a movie that I don't think is as bad as a lot of people remember it. It's certainly the weakest of the three movies by a fairly large margin, but I think that it has some of the best action sequences of those three films. And I think that there's a lot in the movie to really love and interpret and go back over with a fine-tooth comb and really try and figure out, like, why do some of these things work and other things don't? What's going on here? here, and we really dug into the history of this film, like we did with the other ones, but especially with this one, trying to figure out exactly where the miscommunications were happening, why certain decisions were made versus others, and have really tried to get in deep on this movie. And I think that we are I think we're really getting in there, and I'm really excited about the things that we're uncovering as we've been going through this season.
And you guys don't just like do this from like a shallow way. It's like to the level of these Easter eggs, right? Like you're reading the scripts and reading the behind the scenes like diaries and reading like books published about the makings of these films. It's not like just like a fly by night affair.
Right, exactly. There is a ton of research involved. I mean, if you go back and you listen to any of our episodes that we did where we talked about the development of Spider-Man, the development of Spider-Man in particular, the first film, took us, I think, 3 episodes to get through because of how involved it was to get Spider-Man on the big screen for the first time. And then, the same thing with the second one, the behind-the-scenes nature of the development of that film was pretty insane. What with Jake Gyllenhaal almost replacing Tobey Maguire in the film, and what that would have led to. And the same obviously can be said about Spider-Man 3. There's lots of stuff to talk about there. But then, of course, Zach, my co-host, is big into costuming. He has worked in costume departments. Specifically, he's worked on the costumes for Aquaman and Black Panther, amongst others. And so he knows a lot about costuming, and so any episode where he talks about the costumes in the Spider-Man series are always ones to definitely check out because he really knows his stuff.
Well, that's super awesome, and I love the show. Enough that I've been on it a few times, and I'm coming up pretty soon in Spider-Man 3. So if you want to hear my take on Spider-Man 3, which I've not really talked about on my show at all, so. That might be something for my listeners to tune into. But even if you're not interested in hearing about Spider-Man 3, you can always just go back to Spider-Man 1 or 2 and find out about the scenes that like you care about the most and stuff. And also, Scott and Zach have a really great online fan base that's very engaged with them. So that's a lot of fun to kind of participate with too, I think.
Yeah, we're very lucky in that.
Well, I think you do some good work cultivating it. So, hey, thanks again, Scott, for coming on the show. I had a lot of fun talking to you.
Yeah, same here, Dan. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks again to Scott Carelli from the Spider-Man Minute podcast for joining you, Dan, to talk about Spider-Man Far From Home. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. Don't forget to check out the Spider-Man Minute podcast as they start their coverage of Spider-Man 3. Dan, what's coming down the pike for our humble show in the future?
Well, next week we've got our second review roundup of the Hunted storyline, which should be exciting. And if you haven't already checked it out, go back and listen to our last podcast released this morning, all about my experience at the What's Up Danger show celebrating Into the Spider-Verse. I kind of whipped up this bonus pod, and I hope that you guys enjoy it.
Awesome work, Dan. Well, also for our Patreon subscribers, be sure to check out our Patreon page and your podcast feed this week, where we've already got special reviews of the entire Nick Spencer run up through issue number 24. Remember, for just $3.99 a month, the price of a new comic, you'll get access to our exclusive new issue reviews, B-book reviews, and more. And for $10 or more a month, you'll get access to some awesome commission artwork, this time from Barry Kitson, as he depicts the tremendously sad moment when Spider-Man learned of Gwen's demise.
Plus, we've got the amazing Spider Slack community for you to join. Just check this episode's description for a link to join our Spider-Man Talking community. And we've even got a channel there discussing, behind a spoiler wall, all of our thoughts on Spider-Man Far From Home. So if you've seen the movie and you want to talk about it with someone, come join our Spider Slack.
Well, Dan, where can we find you on the interweb?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at @SupSpiderTalk, refraining from talking about this movie until, I guess, 9 days later? That's when the Endgame spoiler wall was lifted. Is the same thing going to hold true here because they don't have to advertise the next Marvel movie? We'll see. I'm gonna try not to spoil this for people.
Yeah, we'll be good.
Yeah. I hope I didn't spoil anything for you, Mark, with my early tweets about it.
No, not at all. Not in the least, Dan. We are good.
All right. Well, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, of course, you can find me on Twitter at ChasingASMblog. And as always, if you want to learn more about Mysterio and everyone else that appears in these movies, you can check out my book, 100 Things Spider-Man Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die.
Awesome, Mark. Well, one thing is always true about Spider-Man, whether he's a mass murderer or not, per lens of Mysterio. And what is that, Mark?
Of course, we all know with great podcasts must also come the all-new Amazing Spider Talk.
Don't miss the next installment.
Here comes the Spider-Man.